everyone. Welcome back to the Flow Show. I'm Joanna Turner, Intuitive Business Mentor. And today we are going to be talking about the battle of resistance, the Eclipse portal that is happening at the moment, and creativity. So welcome. And this episode has been partly inspired by the previous episode I did with Jen Schultz. She mentioned the book The War of Art by Steven Pressfield, and I have read it before, but I felt that it was the reminder I needed to read it again. So maybe some of you have already been inspired to do that and also read it, but I felt that it was the perfect timing for me, and I've been listening to it today while I was walking the dog, and there were some definite parts of it that really hit home, and there are some parts that I don't fully agree with, or I feel like there is space for a little more nuance, but also maybe that is just my resistance showing up in a different crafty way. I don't know. So he definitely talks about resistance having no limits, and we will create and justify and come up with all of the excuses we possibly can. So maybe that is just me coming up with more BS excuses, or maybe there is space for a little more nuance. So let's hope that that is the case as we get into it. Now, and this is also just for anybody that has been a bit of a procrastinator, definitely part of my story. I've had phases in my life where I've felt like there's been a literal wall in front of me. I've had times where I have been in full flow, as in the name of this podcast. I'll tell you a kind of funny story about that today as well, about how this got going and my resistance to getting it going. And so it's usually something that you've been putting off, procrastinating on, but it's always, and we'll get into this, it's always something higher. It's always something good that you are putting off, or something that would lead you to something better. It's never the easy route that we put off, right? That just isn't what happens. So I find that the bigger your dream, the bigger your potential, the bigger your desire to create something, or the bigger the creative force that's running through you, the more resistance you will face. I remember I went to see one spiritual advisor many, many years ago, and she looked in my field or whatever, and she was like, wow, you have so much darkness in here. She's like, I'm surprised you've managed to achieve anything at all with the resistance in your field. And I was like, oh, I've just absolutely pushed through and made things happen despite my absolute extreme resistance to doing it. Every time I have gone to have a photo shoot for my business, the levels of resistance that have come up for me have been extreme. I have wanted to cancel every single photo shoot I've ever done. And I remember speaking to one of the photographer, Wendy Yalom, who has done loads of people in the industry. And I think maybe it was after, I don't know, I've done multiple shoots with her. I did Paris and LA, and was it just the two? I can't remember. Anyway, I mentioned to her like all of my resistance that came up and the fact that I just didn't want to do it. And she said, look, she said, I wouldn't have any clients. I wouldn't be doing branding photo shoots if everybody did them only when they felt really good or they wanted to do them. She said, everybody would cancel. She said, there is so much resistance to having a photo shoot, getting it done and getting out there. And that just, it made a lot of sense to me. I was actually so bloated once before, and I felt like that was my body creating resistance to the photo shoot, that I booked in for a spiritual healing with this amazing man in LA. His name is escaping me right now, but it might come back to me. And I'm sure it begins with an S. But yeah, he was just this wonderful, wonderful man. And he really helped me reduce all of the stress and resistance that was going on in my system and in my stomach. And between walking in there looking probably 8 months pregnant and walking out just looking kind of normal, I was able to actually do the photo shoot the next day, but I don't think I would have been able to had I been in that level of stress and fear, and my body had obviously just reacted and puffed up. I hold a lot of my stress in my stomach. So yeah, I went from looking rather pregnant to being able to do the photo shoot in the clothes I was supposed to do them in. One dress didn't quite do up at the back, but apart from that, we got it done. So yeah, maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe you have experienced resistance yourself, and I wouldn't be surprised. I think it just makes us human, but it also makes us wanting to do something. It wants to make us do something big, higher, creative, get ourselves out there. So there's a whole lot of reasons for this. I'm going to try and sort of stick to Steven's, the way his book flows, because it is kind of the inspiration for this chat, but obviously we'll go a little off piste as we go as well. So basically, he's out there saying the enemy is resistance. Now, I feel like as soon as we make anything an enemy, it gives it more power than it needs to, and often that actually creates more resistance. But anyway, in his words, the enemy is resistance. And he says it's obviously invisible, but it is one of the most powerful forces we will ever experience, especially when we're out to create beautiful things and achieve our full potential. So he calls it, in quotes, a universal insidious enemy that strikes anyone who seeks to create, grow, or aspire to something higher. Whether it's writing a book, starting a business, pursuing a lifelong dream, resistance shows up in the form of fear, procrastination, self-doubt, and distraction. And it's we know that. But what I have noticed in resistance is that it can do wild things to people. Sure, I nearly, didn't have a photo shoot. That wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I've also seen it manifest as illness, disease, wild accidents. All sorts of things can happen when resistance takes over. It can create we can create drama in our lives. And sometimes it's not even just ourselves. The drama takes form of other people's drama that we then have to deal with, which is definitely something I feel like I've been a little bit wrapped up in. But yeah, I once had a client who was so exhausted that and was really, really not wanting to, move forward in her business, that she said that she would actually fantasizing about breaking her arm, because that way it would actually stop her from having to deal with her business and her children, and her husband might actually step up and help her. And I was like, wow, that is an extreme amount of resistance. And then to be fantasizing about that seemed, it's a bit wild. You don't obviously want to cause yourself harm, but that was one of the only ways that she saw as a almost get out clause of her having to do what she wanted to do moving forward. There was going to be some difficult conversations that needed to be had. And instead of having to do that, she would rather just break her arm. And she ended up the next week with this dreadful cold. So yeah, so we will do some crazy things to get out of doing the thing that we know will move us forward. I can come up with more excuses and justifications than almost anyone I know. But yet, there is a part of me that also knows I must keep pushing forward. So the Flow Show is, it launched last year, so the end of 2023. It was on the winter solstice, December 21st to 22nd. And it didn't just launch then, it's been in my field, in my brain for at least 6 years probably. And it was after huge amounts of putting things off and stalling myself, I finally, in 2019, which is 5 years ago, I finally got some podcast cover art done. I was trying to rebrand, I was trying to get websites up, and they never quite came to fruition. I did have some branding done, and the podcast cover exists. It is somewhere floating around, but I never used it. Then I decided that the flow show was definitely, even though all of my work sort of came back to the concept of flow, talk about resistance, I decided the name wasn't good enough. I was like, nope, definitely not. The inner critic was so loud. So I decided I needed a name that was more specific to what I wanted to talk about. How could it be more specific than flow? But anyway, I decided to rename the podcast after many iterations and going round and round in circles, Spiritual Funny Business, because I thought that kind of summed up all of the elements that I wanted to create in the podcast. And I had cover art made, and I actually interviewed about 10 people maybe, and 2 episodes made it live onto this podcast. So an intro and my first episode is still somewhere floating around on Spotify for your amusement, if nothing else. But that was attempt number 2. That was in probably maybe late 2019 or 2020 that I'm finally managed to force myself to get that up. But I went round and round in circles. I then decided that wasn't good enough, and it had taken so much force for me to figure out all the nuts and bolts, to force myself to do the interviews, force myself to do the cover art, force myself to put it out there. I was in such resistance to it that once it was up and out into the world, my adrenaline dropped and I lost all notion or sort of oomph to get the rest of the episodes out, and it just stopped dead in its tracks. So that was another attempt. Then I decided that maybe the name wasn't right and I should rebrand it something ridiculous like Sex, Money and Puppies. I had obviously had a new puppy and I was like going through my tantra era, and I thought, oh, that'll get people's attention. That is definitely what I should call my podcast. And I had one friend that was like egging me on and thought it was a great idea. So I created more cover art for that, started doing that. And again, it just went nowhere. So that was probably pandemic, early 2020, got that up and then just again stopped in my tracks. So there was then a pause of like 4 years, maybe 3 years. And I was like, right, I really need to get the podcast up. What am I going to call it? Finally, I was like, let's just go back to the original, back to basics. We'll call it the Flow Show. Let's get it up there and get on with it and stop going round in circles. So my resistance sent me on so many weird and wonderful rabbit holes, convincing myself that the name wasn't good enough, convincing myself that I had to change it, that I had to do all these different ridiculous things. And in truth, it should have just been the Flow Show, and I could be an additional 5-6 years down the track with the show. But here we are. So that's okay. This is episode 35, and I am so proud of myself for sticking with it. Very, very few podcasts get past that 1-2 episode mark like I got stuck at last time. Then very few get past the 10 episodes mark. Most people give up after that. And then, so still been going at the 35 episode mark is actually puts my podcast in a very small, like, I don't know, 1% or something like that, just because, not even down to obviously listenership or anything, but just down to getting the podcast out and sticking with it. Now, I wanted to be consistent every single week. Have I been? Absolutely not. There was one week I think I put 3 episodes out, and then another 6-week gap I didn't put any out. And again, it could have been the time I stopped, but I am back. So after the podcast got a big boost around the Lions Gate, which was lovely, and I was so excited, and we got loads of new listeners. Welcome, thank you for being here. And was it my resistance? Was it life? Was it whatever was going on? But the Lions Gate kicked my butt. Nothing really was going on personally for me, but in the people and what was going on around me was just crazy drama. And it really knocked me sideways what was happening within my family and surrounds. 2 out of 3 of my closest family members were in hospital. There were operations. There was just a lot going on. And there was one moment of like a 5-minute period where I had 2 massive bits of shocking information. And I was just sort of, I remember standing in the kitchen just being like, wow, like I feel like I had just been kind of blindsided and trying to deep breathe through these 2 bits of quite shocking news. So there was just a lot going on, and yet I still wanted to continue, obviously, with the podcast. I recorded 1 episode twice and just decided it wasn't good enough. And then I thought, right, I can't record it a 3rd time. I'm losing track of what I've said, what I haven't said. And then I thought, right, I'm going to record a completely different episode and get that out. I tried that. Again, I just felt it wasn't good enough. And so I scrapped that. And I thought, right, let me do this interview with Jen. I can at least get that up. That was easy. And the other episodes I tried to edit and sort of knit them together. And it was taking so long. And I thought, this is not the way. And I think a lot of that was obviously resistance to maybe feeling like the podcast was finally sort of getting going and whatever. So maybe my resistance kicked up and those things around me started happening. So who knows? But we're back again. And I've decided that after listening to The War of Art this morning, I am putting this episode up regardless. It's happening. Whether I like it or not, whether the things that were annoying me in the last episodes happen again, I just have to get it up, and then that is going to get me over myself, over my resistance, and get it out into the world. And that was one of the big things when I started the podcast. Sorry, I'm rambling on a little bit, but when I started the podcast again, I didn't have a plan or any great aspirations for the podcast, which might sound funny, but a huge amount of it was just to allow me to get over myself, but also to help people, obviously, of course. But I wanted to speak. I needed to get my words out there. I needed to get some of the stuff I had been learning over the years out into the world. And I wanted to have it sort of as a record, because I felt if I didn't honor the information, the creativity, whatever muse had been trying to play through me, that I would really regret it, and I would I don't know, that something within me might not die, but it wouldn't. There was something has been trying to come through, and I was like, right, I need to just unleash my voice and let whatever needs to come through, whether I like it or not, whether I'm judging it. But there's also an element of respecting you, my beautiful listeners, whoever you are. That's weird to me as well, that I don't know who you are. But I want to honor your time and your listening, and I don't want it to be something that isn't great, but at the same time, I can be my biggest critic. So there's just a combination of pieces of the puzzle, and I was like, right, today is the day. I am sitting down and getting this done, no matter what. That's the plan. So I'm sure you can identify with some of that. The resistance is absolutely real, and there's an example I've used before, and I had a client, and she had her own live event coming up, maybe a few months down the line, in her local to where she lived area, and she was wanting to make it a beautiful big event. She was excited, and she'd managed to line up, I think it was 5 speaking engagements locally to her dream audience, that she was allowed to share a little bit about what she does, and also that she had her event coming up. And obviously that was great. You know, once you've met somebody in person, she was brilliant. She spoke well. She has a bubbly, amazing personality. She has great stuff to share. And she was also super determined. I've not met many people that were so determined to make things happen and get it done. She was a dream client. And just before her first of these 5 speaking gigs, she came down with strep throat, really, really bad, and ended up in hospital. And she obviously couldn't do the first speaking gig. I don't know, maybe she missed 2. I can't really remember all the exact details, but I know that she was obviously unable to speak, physically unable to speak. And when she came on to our mastermind call, she shared, well, I missed 2 or 3 of these speaking events before my event. I had strep throat. And I remember saying something along the lines of, wow, your resistance is pretty intense, or something like that. And she was like, what? And she, in that moment, had not put the 2 and 2 together, that her body had somehow manifested one of the only things that would actually have stopped her speaking at those events. I sort of joked. I said, look, if you had broken your leg, you would have either hobbled up on that stage because you were so persistent on crutches, or you would have had figured out a way for somebody to roll you up on a wheelchair so as you could deliver your talk and presentation. The only thing that you couldn't force yourself to do is if you had no voice. And that really hit her quite hard. She was quite shocked that she might have some underlying level of resistance that might have caused her in that exact week or moment to have strep throat and therefore not be able to show up. Because again, I know how persistent and how dedicated she was to her business and to showing up, that it was almost like her body knew that nothing else would have quite cut it. She would have figured out and found a way if it had been something else. It is a real thing, and it can show up in many, many ways. Sometimes, of course, people, for me, I might scroll too much sometimes. Obviously some people, it's going to show up as drinking too much, having a drugs problem, having a gambling addiction. I mean, these things, one of my biggest probably things of forms of procrastination has been getting a damn dog. I adore my baby. Bella is beautiful. She's also one of the best things in my life. But I allow her to take so much of my time. I put her first. Her walks can take hours. She is patted and petted for hours a day. She demands more pats. Whatever it is, I spend a lot of time pandering to her every need, which I am more than happy to do, by the way. But it is such an easy thing it's a really easy justification for me of putting my own stuff off or not doing my own thing. When I first got her, really stopped going to the gym because I put her first. I put her, I'm sure as mums, not just dog mums, will appreciate that happens, and that you go through phases of your life where these things are a lot more important. But there comes a point where we can no longer continue to blame having a blooming dog or your children. I remember another client was like, well, I'll do it once they're at university. And I was like, oh, okay. You've hired a coach to to get your business going, and now you're telling me you're going to wait until your children are in university. So obviously my first question is, how old are your children? And she's like, well, I can't remember their real names. Let's say Sammy is 10 and David is 12. Right? I don't know. That's not their names. But I was like, wow. And they would go to university at what age? 18, 19? And she's like, yeah, that would be about right. And I said, right. So you're going to blame your children for another 8 years and put off your dream and your business and, doing this thing, and you're going to put it on them and blame them for existing for you not to do your thing, right? And she was like, well, when you put it like that, right? It's a lot to put on somebody, making it their fault, not your own. stuff, your own resistance that comes up to doing the thing, right? And of course, there are so many people who, I understand having children is a lot. Oh my goodness, I don't have any, but babysitting for 24 hours has me wiped out for a few days. I understand it's a lot. I know a lot more people homeschool. I'm not trying to make you bad or wrong, but in this instant, my client, they were at school full time. She had support. She had a husband. It wasn't something she really needed to put off. They weren't toddlers. They were, nearly in secondary school, and, it was time to go after her own dreams as well. All right. So that's that first part. There's a few more pieces to this. So the next part he goes on to talk about a little bit is he breaks down the difference between a professional and an amateur. And when I was listening to it, I was like, ooh, I was probably showing up more as a professional years ago. And at the moment, the last couple of years, I've probably been showing up a little bit more amateur. Allowing things to be excuses for maybe not showing up if something happens, whatever. So, and this is where we go a little bit like, we go a little bit off track with what he's talking about. Oh, and I wanted to also mention before we get into that, hang on just a second. I did say we would talk about the eclipses going on. So it's no coincidence that we are in this. We're talking about the war of art. We're talking about resistance. We're talking about resistance to change, resistance to your creativity during this time in this eclipse portal. So I do want to mention that. We've already had part of it. We have another great big part coming up on October the 2nd. It's a new moon and I believe a solar eclipse on the 2nd. And it's sort of part of this series that is ongoing at the moment. And this solar eclipse is interesting because eclipses tend to bring the end to something, closing a chapter, completing a section, and it's in a new moon, and that is usually when we are manifesting, setting intentions, starting afresh, starting anew. And so we're in this moment, and hopefully you'll listen to this during this moment, and it feels like we're in a bit of a choice point. And I think that's why this book has come into my awareness and I've read it again, is because it is calling us, while I might not agree with every single word he says, it is calling us to a point where we get to choose. And it feels like a really nice time this week. And obviously on October the 2nd is going to be really potent to commit to a higher path and to let go of some of the behaviors that might have been part of our resistance, might have been part of our justifications. And specifically because this eclipse is in Libra, apparently it's got a lot to do, I'm not an astrologer, but apparently it's got a lot to do with relationships and partnerships and, how we work with other people and our interpersonal dynamics. And obviously Libra is about finding a balance between these things. And specifically, I've seen a few people talking about it is a time to stop our people-pleasing tendencies. And I saw a lovely quote the other day, I can't remember where it was, but it said, oh, you're a people pleaser. Great. Show me the people that you have pleased. And that was like, ooh, ouch. Okay. So I would say I was a recovering people pleaser. Jen in the last podcast was definitely in that. She called herself that as well. And so many of us were trying so hard to do something that pleased other people. And yet the people that we were trying to please were never pleased. They were not pleased. So this is a really nice time. Obviously where it lands in your chart or whatever is going to be different for everybody, but it is a really nice time to decide. There's a lot of shifts happening, obviously globally. There's a lot of chaos happening in the world. There is a moment of deciding what your next path is going to be. And if there has been resistance up until now, how are we going to show up and do the thing and overcome this resistance? So I'll tell you what Steven says about this and then what I think about this next part. So the amateur believes he must overcome his fear and then he can do his work. The professional knows that fear can never be overcome. Now, that is profound in some ways. And yet, I agree with it to a point, but yet, again, I want to bring in, while I hate the word nuance, I feel like it needs a little more nuance, you know? So, yeah, there is an element of, if you're not pushing yourself and not getting out of your comfort zone enough, then you're not really, and you're not feeling that fear, then you're not growing, right? So in the sense that the professional knows that fear will never be overcome, if you're always growing, then you should be always coming up against some new level of fear or resistance, I suppose. But the amateur believing that you can overcome fear first and then do it, I can see where he's coming from in that, because there's a paradigm, I suppose, out there that people believe that what they can heal themselves, become their best self, and then they can find their partner, and then I will, be able to coach people, and then I will be able to live a happy life once I've done all this healing work. But the tricky thing about resistance is that if you are telling yourself that once you've done all your healing, then you will go and do X, Y, and Z, your psyche will come up with more and more and more stuff for you to heal. And it might never end. And I do believe at one point in my journey, I was a little bit caught up in that. I was so focused on the more I heal, the higher my vibration will rise, and therefore I will, have a bigger impact on the world. I will attract better things to me. And yes, that is true. However, I think I was so kind of obsessed with that notion that I kind of got a bit lost in my emotional world, and I was spinning. I wasn't really moving forward. Instead of like healing something, taking action, moving forward, I was spending too much time swamping around in my healing phase and not enough. I'd been like so doing and hustling, and then I went from full hustle, doing, full healing mode, not doing so much, that I lost that balance. And I truly believe that you can, and it is important, we'll get into this, heal some of the things that are causing the fear. But I think there has to be a balance of continuing to move forward, doing the work and healing at the same time, not just telling yourself that you'll do it once you're fully healed. And I think it's this concept that really only can you fully heal. For instance, if it was saying, oh, I won't date until I'm healed, a lot of that stuff can only be healed in relationship. Like you have to, you can think you are healed and dealt with all your issues, but until you're faced with a situation within a relationship, are you really healed, right? Or you think you've healed all of your mommy daddy issues, and then you go home for the Christmas holidays and you realize within a day that, oh, actually I am triggered, I am annoyed by this, I am whatever, and you haven't actually healed that to its fullest extent yet. So, but you wouldn't know that. You could go around. I had a client again once saying something came up within her process, and she's like, oh, no. That it can't be about my mother. I've healed that. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, it's come up again. Should we look at it? And she didn't want to look at it, of course, but that's exactly what we needed to look at, because there was another layer had been revealed. There was more healing to be done, and that's okay. But if we think we're done healing or we don't have anything to do, I think both parts we can tell ourselves. But I think it's just about finding the balance, not getting lost in it, and not avoiding it either. So I do believe that creativity, when we look at the things that are causing the resistance, can become even more enjoyable, and they do not have to just be this pushing through fear of death every morning to sit down at your desk. I don't think it has to be that bad. Right? He has just muscled through, and that's been his process, which is great and fine. And we often teach from what has healed us or what were our coping mechanisms. You often find that big coaches, even the likes of Tony Robbins, he teaches the process that was part of his coping mechanism to get through his life and his childhood traumas and the things that happened to him. And that's where he teaches from, which is perfect because we can only really teach from our experience. So we've just got to be careful if you are like who we are following and who we are using as the example, right? If you just listen to this book by Steven Pressfield, you would think, okay, there's nothing I can do to reduce my fear. I'm just going to put my head down, chain myself to my desk and muscle through every day, even though it feels like I'm going to die every single morning and I feel sick and I don't want to do it. I'm just going to sit there and do it anyway. There is an element of you can get through doing that, but at the same time, wouldn't it be nicer to deal with some of what is going on underneath instead of just ignoring it and pushing through? So we have a little bit of a slight difference in opinion, but I can also see where he's coming from. There is an element of at some point how much digging can you do? Another client I once said to, she was digging and I said, what are you trying to find here? Like, are you trying to find out by digging deep into this that you're a bad person? It was almost like she wanted to find something really dark and scary, and then it would justify everything. Then she would understand her resistance. Then she would understand why it hadn't happened for her yet. But I feel like that digging was a form of resistance, and so I called it out. I was like, what are we looking for here? What is the actual problem? What's really going on? So we can get caught up in that, and it's nice to have somebody to hold space for it and to see it, but you don't want to just be spinning in the same stories and the same stuff. The other cool thing is when you do go and just sit and get it done, you will face a new thing, a new level of a new resistance, a new fear, a new something will come up. But if we never get started, we're not going to be able to meet those next levels and those challenges as we go on as well. So there's definitely balance to be found within this, right? Like there's a yes and a piece to this. So in his book, literally they talk about the Nike mentality, that just do it. And it can be, there's something about just doing it in the way that it can build confidence. So taking some steps forward, again, if we've been spinning and not doing anything, taking some steps forward and just doing it can actually give us some confidence. And then that little bit of confidence from just doing it can give us some more, and we can get momentum from that, right? So again, I try with the gym to not overthink it. I enjoy it once I'm there, but if I think about it too much and I start going into my justification and, well, you had that little niggle, or you're a little bit stiff from the other day, or maybe you should blah, blah, blah. I have been the queen of making up excuses for not going to the gym. But I find if I just put my shoes on, or if I get up and have my shower and get ready and have my stuff on and I have my trainers on, then I'm much more likely, there's another layer of resistance has already gone. So I can't, by the time I'm getting ready to go, be like, oh, well, I don't really have time for a shower, or I don't have, oh, I better walk the dog. I will go and walk the dog in my gym gear and then go to the gym. So I try not to overthink it. If I have the notion, I just go. And once I'm there, and sometimes I tell myself, I just need to go for 10 minutes. Just get in the door, do a couple of bits. If you're not feeling it, you can leave, but just go and get yourself in the door. And the amount of times I've had the best workout when I've not really been feeling it, but once I'm there, I can get into it and I really enjoy it. So again, there is an element of just doing it, overthinking it is not going to get us there, but maybe there's another piece of digging into why I don't want to go to the gym, or what might happen, blah, 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 right? So there's deeper layers going on underneath that resistance. And while we can push through, we can also look at the layers of, why don't I want to go to the gym? Do I have a fear of shedding this weight? What is happening if we dig a little bit deeper into that, then we can release some of the resistance and it becomes easier. So, and also part of this is habit. Once we just get into the habit of it, it does become easier. And I definitely find if I have missed the gym or whatever for a week or 2 weeks, it can for me turn into 4 weeks, can turn into, I had a 6-week break over the summer. And I was like, what am I doing? I need to just get back and do it and get back into the habit. And I'm in a really good run at the moment. And I definitely will be going later today, no matter what. So that is the plan. Okay. So I think there's also an element of being kind to yourself. Like, just saying just do it doesn't always work. When there is underlying trauma and pain, the resistance is real, right? The fear is real, and we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to honor ourselves. I've had quite a weight journey, and, my sister is a personal trainer, and yet she would say things like, well, why don't you just eat less and exercise more? And I'm like, oh, no shit, Sherlock. If it was that simple, I would have done it. I would have done it already, So there are definitely layers and layers of things going on, right? Emotional, psychological wounds. They can come from trauma from our childhood, within our ancestry, from past lives. Some of this stuff that is going on in our resistance in this lifetime is really deep. Some of it, and it doesn't even have to have necessarily been like a big capital T trauma. Sometimes it's the little T traumas. Sometimes it's a build up of little things. Sometimes, I'm sure I've mentioned on the podcast, it can be something a teacher said once. It can be these little things that are planted in our psyche that create a story and a resistance, and a lot of it, it's real. So let's also not discount it. And if you feel that you can't just do it, then let's get some help. Let's unwind the stuff that's going on, right? There are ways to do that. We can talk about it. One simple way actually that I find that is really easy, if you don't have time or the finances to hire a coach, get a therapist, go to some spa somewhere and do whatever, just doing some EFT tapping can be so effective, so helpful, especially about getting over that initial just get into it phase. So there's loads of videos on it. There's a few on my YouTube channel explaining it, walking you through it, and some videos as well. But there's loads of other ones on there as well. Brad Yates is one that I quite often watch. I haven't done it for a little while, but if I'm feeling the resistance, I will go and do some tapping with him, because it's weird watching myself. So yeah, there's ways to start to overcome it that don't cost money, that you can do, but even you can have resistance to doing the tapping, right? Like, I know how effective tapping is. Do I do it every day? No, I don't, right? So you can even have resistance to that, but we've got to take some steps forward to help ourselves get back on track and start the process and the unwind. All right, so maybe you're an amateur like I am. Maybe you're a pro and you will sit at your desk, and maybe we can find a balance in between and be a professional amateur, right? Maybe that's what I am, a professional amateur. So let's see. So yeah, I really do feel like we can heal some of this resistance. I mean, the resistance might be showing up as burnout, as depression, as anxiety. Like, these are major things that can really throw your life and your mission and your purpose off balance. And I feel like most of us have a dream. And if you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you have a dream, you have something that's bubbling away inside of you. there's going to be something, right? So there are different ways we can start to loosen this grip. Even if meditating is a beautiful way to do it. But again, I know what it's like. I used to have so much resistance to meditating, and I had to dig deeper within that. And there was a part of me that felt I was going to die if I meditated, which is ridiculous. But I had to honor that and work through it. And now I have a lot less resistance to meditation. So yeah, we've got to just meet ourselves where we're at, take the baby steps. If you need to force it a little bit, you can, but like, again, taking that balanced approach of helping yourself release resistance and working on it with somebody and doing the tapping, right? We can do all the bits and not just get lost in one or the other. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this feeling of within the eclipse of ending. Now, in our evolution, when things are changing, whether it's a new identity that you're taking on at this time, whether that's I am no longer a people pleaser, there's a part of you that people pleaser has to die. So it can be a time of confusion, of grief, of grieving that old part of you, that old life that you had, that sometimes it's letting go of friendships that no longer serve you, something that's been pulling you down, or they ridicule you, or they don't support you, or they don't believe that your dream is valid, or whatever that looks like. So it can be a time of feeling like things have been stripped away. And while I'm not going to say it's absolutely any fault of their own in the slightest, I'm looking at footage of poor folk in the midst of that dreadful Hurricane Helene, and they're literally having everything stripped away from them, whether they like it or not. Their homes, all their belongings. It is heartbreaking. And it's just, I mean, I've been through multiple hurricanes and cyclones and things, and it is terrifying and awful. And I mean, just I can't even imagine. And these people are like, everything is going. Their entire old way of life, their entire towns disappearing. I mean, it's just crazy. People's places of work are gone. Their homes are gone. I mean, let's just spend a moment and send them some love and a prayer, because like whatever you're going through, whether you might be in the middle of that. A lot of us, we think we're going through something, but we're not in the middle of that, and we've not had absolutely everything we know completely ripped away. Like this, for most of us, it is a friend, something else. Like it might not, and it's the end of a friendship isn't quite your entire existence and history and every belonging you have being completely washed away. So just sparing a moment for those people going through that. But I find that the timing interesting. It is in this eclipse portal. It's wild. But yeah, just I've seen some of that footage, and I really, really feel for them. So what are you letting go? What are you stepping into that is time to change? What are you? I feel like these eclipses, it's going to happen whether you like it or not. They are not, they don't ask for permission in a sense, right? Like it's not would you like to happen? And even your level of resistance, it almost doesn't matter, right? Like they are coming in, and it's going to be swept through from your life one way or another. Deep change is here. It is happening. And I guess we get to choose how we handle it, how we come out the other side. And as much as I know these people, the devastation that they're going through, where I lived in Australia, I went through something similar just after I had left, actually. But the way our shopping centres washed through, there are roads washed away, there were people stranded up mountains, and it's a very similar pattern to what's happening in America at the moment. And the beautiful thing that came from that was the community coming together, was the They didn't have a lot of help from the government. In fact, I think they turned up, got some shovels out for a photo shoot and then left. That was the extent of the army help. The locals came together themselves and were evacuating people, were scrambling helicopters, were getting their family fishing boats and jet skis, and they were out there rescuing people on surfboards. I get chills just thinking about it. I was so, and a bit emotional, so overwhelmed by the community coming together and the efforts of the average person to help his community and people they don't know. And there was one guy went on this big mission to rescue a dog, and they got the dog, and it was really heartwarming. But it was obviously in the face of devastation, and whenever but a lot of these guys spent months just volunteering, helping people clear their homes, fundraising, and they had a full, everybody came together and were cooking meals, and it was really beautiful to see humanity and the best of humanity come out of something that was so terrible and so tragic. So I presume something similar will happen. Hopefully they get the support they need, and then the community come together as well. But yeah, just really, really, really tragic. Okay, so gosh, I got a little bit teary, a little bit emotional just thinking about all that and like what folk have had to endure. It's just awful. Okay, so Steven Pressfield in the book says turning pro is about fully committing. Now, I can get on board with that. Fully committing to your craft and letting go of the fears and excuses that are holding us back. Sure. And this solar eclipse is basically pushing us in the same direction, right? We're going into new territory, we're going into the unknown, and it will probably become quite obvious to you what chapter in your life is ending, what excuses need to end, and while we might not know exactly what the new beginning is for us or what this next chapter looks like, we can allow ourselves to close that other one, hopefully with some grace, and let it go without clinging too hard to it. Okay, so this next end part in the War of Art, because we'll talk about the whole bit. So in the last section, he starts talking, and he gets a little esoteric because it's all been quite like just push yourself. He does talk about the muse, the mystery, and even angels. And for me, that's the part that's that magic within flow, when it just starts pouring through you. The time I wrote like something like 21 emails in one sitting for a whole sales what do you call it, like launch campaign, and that I was in full flow. There was something coming through me that was beyond me. I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to eat, I didn't want to go to the bathroom, I didn't want to stop in case the muse disappeared, because it was flowing. And I'm sure at the time my assistant would have like opened her email and been like, what just happened? I wasn't messing around in the system. I was just literally, as the emails would come through, I would just email her the email that I wanted to send out in the system and have all the links and all the things. But yeah, I was just emailing her one after the other as the inspiration came through, because that was the quickest, easiest way to sort of get it down without faffing. So, and keep it somewhat organized. So that was happening. And so he does talk about that. He does acknowledge that it's not maybe just you sitting there with your thoughts and talents and dreaming up the plot of your murder mystery, but there is something greater than us that does flow through and brings that creativity, brings that more mystical side through for us. And he admits that he prays to the muse before he starts his work, right? So he is setting an intention, he's calling in the muse, this higher source, whatever we want to call it. So He believes, though, that when we actually get over ourselves and sit down to do the work, he says that the power concentrates around us and the muse takes notes of our dedication. She approves and we have earned favour in her sight. So he believes it only comes when you actually just sit your butt down and then she sort of rewards you for that. Where I will again give him that, right? But in the way that I like to think of it, I often don't think that the best creative ideas come from sitting at my laptop. No offense, Steven, but my creative spark, again, that's quite a sort of masculine thing. My creative spark usually comes when I'm doing something embodied. I'm in my body, I'm out for a walk, I'm doing yoga, I'm meditating, I'm doing something like that. And I find that if the spark or the muse comes to me in that way, a bit like this episode did, then it's then my what do you call it? My can't think of the word. It's my responsibility, I suppose, to harness that little spark that came to me when I was doing something, when I wasn't overthinking, when I wasn't in my head, and I was out walking or whatever. So I then need to go and take that muse, take that thread, and sit down and turn it into something, whether it's sitting at the laptop, writing away, speaking into the podcast, whatever that is. I do kind of believe, though, we need that little spark before, but then he says, is that another just excuse, waiting for this inspiration to strike before you sit down to do the thing? Maybe you should just sit down and do the thing. So I will acknowledge that maybe that is also part of my resistance, my story to myself that I need a spark of inspiration, or I know what I need to say before I sit down. Maybe I'm kidding myself there. Okay, so I will admit that maybe that's part of my story, but I think it's pretty good. I think they seem to be, when I've spoken to people, when I've interviewed people, it seems to be they had a whisper in a meditation. They just heard something and they were like, oh, that's it. And they might not have heard it had they been sitting at the laptop going, all right, give me an idea. What am I supposed to do? Right? Let's make it happen. So again, it's this, again, if we're in a time of Libra, it's the scales, it's balance. Maybe it's a bit of both, right? Maybe you can get the idea, come back, write it down. Maybe the idea will come when you're sitting there. Maybe it's both. Maybe you just need to find what's best for you and work with that. But I do believe that when we commit to getting something done, we commit to a certain outcome, I do believe that things start to move in our favor when we make that commitment. So what comes first? Was it the commitment to doing it, the commitment to showing up, the commitment, did I say to myself, right, I'm going to get an episode out, hell or high water, and then the spark of idea to talk about the war of art? Maybe. So it's there's a piece of, if I had just been waiting for the inspiration but I hadn't committed to getting an episode out, would it have come? I don't know. So I think finding what works for you and taking away as much resistance or obstacle for those ideas to come is important. He did also mention that once he's finished his writing for the day, he goes on a big hike, but he has to take, back in the day, like a recorder, voice recorder thing. Nowadays, obviously, you can do it in your notes on your phone or whatever, because he would continually get more information and ideas coming through while he was on his afternoon hike. So you can flip it around, take your hike in the morning, get the ideas, then sit at your desk, or not, right? So we've just got to find what works for us. But he also said that the pro eliminates distractions. So the pro like tries to eliminate the chaos and things going on around them to allow the space to be able to sit. So for instance, if your house is clean, the surfaces, you're not, things aren't all over the place. I find it really difficult to work in a clutter, if things aren't clear, if my desk is a mess. Again, is that resistance? Is that my story? I don't know. But for me, I find it much easier when I have space to, a clear space to spread out and think, or lay a few bits or whatever around me when I'm working on something. It just depends. But yeah, I do like to create the space. So often when I'm working with clients, or if it's a group program or a mastermind or something like that, the first thing we do in part of our pre-work before we even start is we declutter. We're detox, and maybe that's detoxing your body as well, right? We want to be setting the scene for, and the more that you declutter, you create space to allow more to come into you. That's one of the principles of Feng Shui. So yeah, we want to declutter. If you want a beautiful new wardrobe, are you throwing out all of your stained sweatshirts and t-shirts and things with holes in it? Or are you, does the new stuff have the space to come in? Or are you hanging on to all those old things that could really do with going in the bin, So one of the things I'm actually been really disciplined about is I love getting rid of things when they are done. Sometimes I'm maybe a bit hasty in that, but I can't have a constant charity bag ready. And obviously things aren't good enough for that, go in the bin, but I love getting rid of things and clearing and decluttering and giving myself the mental space. It's really therapeutic. And I recently did that. I was helping my mum out, and we have a laundry room that has not been cleared out. I don't know. It feels like probably in decades. And she just couldn't even see what she had. And I was like, right, we're just gonna take a couple of hours this afternoon. Let's just go through it step by step. And the resistance to throwing things out that had marks or stains or whatever on them was palpable. But once we did a few, she got into it, and she was like, that can go, that can go, that can go. And I was like, what's this pile over here? Oh, that can go. And I was like, oh my goodness, that was just her not even needing to be forced to go through it. So once we did that, but we had space, we could see what she had. She's like, oh, I've not seen this for a while, and blah, blah. I was like, great. So we had the space. Stuff that was really never going to be used has gone, and it was really therapeutic, and she has more space to do her thing, and is quite happy. And you will never remember the bits that have been thrown away, right? You never think, oh, remember that. It just doesn't happen. Once it's gone, and you can move on. So maybe if you're in this eclipse period, maybe doing a bit of a declutter is something that you could start on, letting go of things that don't match who you want to be or who you are becoming. If they really are not how your higher self would show up, maybe it's time to let them go and make space for the new. So, and sometimes when you're feeling stuck, if you have been in resistance and feeling stuck, that is the easiest way to get some momentum is doing a bit of a declutter, because you might not know what you need to do or start or write or whatever, but letting go of some of the old stuff can really, really open up space, because you're getting that momentum. So you're feeling that satisfaction. You're feeling like you're getting somewhere. You have the space. It feels easier to breathe. It's a really great time. So, so in the solar eclipse, what are you committing to? Are you asking for clarity? If you feel stuck or you feel that you don't know how to move forward, ask for the clarity. And I often find, again, I keep saying this today, but like with clients, they'd be like, they might say something like, I'm thinking of a specific one, but they'd say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have clarity. That would be like this. I don't know what my next steps are. I don't know what my soul's purpose are. And again, I'm very into conscious language, and I'm like, right, let's change the vocabulary. Let's change what we're saying here. I am becoming more clear. I am Clarity is coming to me. I know I will be able to get clear on my next steps, right? We've got to just be conscious that we're not just looping around in some really unhelpful language. And if you're not quite ready to say, I am clear, I know exactly what I'm doing, you can add those little qualifiers. I am becoming clear. I know clarity is coming to me. I am open to being clear and knowing exactly what my next steps are, right? We can amend the wording a little bit so as we have less resistance to the wording, right? So it's lots of little things that add up to helping us get through it. And if you are, in this eclipse struggle, again, just be gentle with yourself. It will pass. Things are going to change. It is intense, but just please be kind to yourself and remember that whatever is being taken away, cleared away, it really is clearing space for your path to your highest creative expression. It is creating space for you to do the things you really want to do. So really, if you have been struggling, you've been procrastinating, feel like you've been holding back, definitely check out the book. Read the book. Obviously, if there's bits of it, some of them might just be little triggers. You're like, oh no. But yeah, hold some of it lightly. Especially when he says you can't get over your fear. There might be something going on underneath that needs a little investigation. We don't want to get lost in our investigation, but there might be something. So check it out and have a look at it. Yes, let's all turn pro in the sense that we are healing what holds us back. We are aligning with this beautiful, powerful energy of the Eclipse Portal. We are in our process to overcome our resistance. We are bringing through our art, our true selves into the world. And it is all possible and the good will come. And let's do it. All right. So I think that's my thoughts complete on that. I'm sure there's more to come, but for the sake of the length of this podcast, I will leave it there for today. And if you are looking for support in letting go of your resistance, healing that part, obviously that is something I do. I work with clients at the moment, mainly one-on-one. I have some things bubbling up about that will be hopefully coming out in the not so distant future. But I do work with people one-on-one in a mentorship containers. I help them grow themselves, to grow their business, to overcome the fear, the resistance, the procrastination, get clear on where you're headed, and then obviously support you along that journey so as you don't get stuck in the spinning, in the cycle, in all the different ways that it crops up. And we just keep moving through whatever comes up and moving forward and creating the momentum that is so magical. So if that is something that you might want some help with, the link to chat with me is in the show notes. There's no commitment call, so we can have a chat, if only for people though that are genuinely considering working with a coach or mentor to help themselves. I would be more than happy to talk to you and see if it's a fit. All right, lovelies. So links will be in the show notes. And as always, I really, really appreciate any likes, shares, comments, your thoughts. Please share them. I love this to be interactive. Feel like I'm getting to know you guys. Feel like it is a collaboration. If you want me to cover something, if there's something that you feel like you would like me to cover, reach out, let me know. I'm happy to do that. If you have somebody that you would love to have me interview, again, hook us up, connect us. That would be amazing. If you think you are the right fit to be a guest on the podcast, you're more than welcome to reach out as well. If you have a cool story to share, a flow story, if you're into your planetary grid work, then you can reach out as well. And I'd love to chat with you. All right. Oh, it's 11:11. I'm going to stop it right here. Bye.